We all had, to witness that excruciating video. And it's painful and hurtful. But today, it's a huge step in the healing process. When I say healing, it's not just the pain that our family feels. Hopefully it's a healing. It's healing in the way that policing is carried on.
George Floyd's family speaking out after Minneapolis agreed to a record $27 million settlement to resolve lawsuits over the death of Floyd while in police custody last year. By now, you probably know most of the details, but we're going to do a quick recap before we talk more about the trial that began last week. Floyd was arrested on Memorial Day, accused of passing a fake $20 bill. Then during his arrest, police officer Derek Chauvin put his knee on Floyd's neck and kept it there for more than 9 minutes as Floyd laid there saying he couldn't breathe. Floyd, of course, later died at the hospital. That video was seen by tens of millions of people, and it spurred a massive outburst of anger and weeks of protests, some of them turning violent. A few days after Floyd died, the officer who kneeled on Floyd's neck, Derek Chauvin, was arrested. He's now facing murder and manslaughter charges. Chauvin and 3 other officers who were on the scene were all fired last summer and are all now facing separate trials. Jury selection is in week 2, and it's taking a long time. That's due to the nature of the case, but also because COVID protocols are slowing things down. As of yesterday, 7 out of 12 jurors were seated, but 2 were dropped over concerns of their impartiality in the wake of that settlement with Floyd's family. Cameras are in the courtroom, so we can show you the exchange between the judge and one of those now former jurors.
Late last week, there was extensive media coverage about developments in a civil suit between the city of Minneapolis and the family of George Floyd. Were you inadvertently exposed to any coverage of this, directly, indirectly?
Yes, I was.
Okay, can you tell me what you heard? Do you remember a specific amount or just that it was a large amount?
20, over 20 maybe.
Okay.
I think it will be hard to be impartial.
All right. Then I'm going to excuse you from this case.
Let's bring in our next guest to discuss. Mayo Bartlett is an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett, PLLC. He's also former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County, New York District Attorney's Office. Mayo, let's begin with jury selection in the Floyd trial. It is taking a long time, and the judge is now asking questions of potential jurors about the Floyd family civil settlement last week. Is the process being too selective when it comes to excluding potential jurors? And how relevant is the settlement to the criminal trial? Is it relevant at all?
Having done a lot of jury trials, I don't think it can be too selective. In fact, I think if anything, it's often not selective enough. So generally, you'll be in a situation where you may have 30 to 40 seconds to literally interact with each juror. And there's no way you'd ever make a significant decision in your life with that limitation. So in this case, I think that it's essential that people answer honestly, but also that they think it through. So you will have a position with respect to Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives, and maybe you support both, maybe you think both are bad. It doesn't mean you can't be a fair juror. It doesn't mean you can't listen to the evidence and reach a real conclusion just based upon the evidence that's submitted. So quite often people are excluded because they went to a rally or because they are supportive of, they don't think that somebody should have been treated a particular way. It doesn't mean that they've heard the evidence and that they'll be unfair based upon their previous information. Now, the settlement is going to be important because almost nobody doesn't know about the $27 million settlement. That being said, again, that has nothing to do with whether they committed a crime. In fact, the settlement itself is not addressed to the particular officers. So I think that they should definitely take the time to ask questions and make sure they get it right, that they afford the defendants a fair jury and a fair trial. But at the same time, I think that you should be able to find that there are many people who are prospective jurors who would be fine and would be able to sit quite well and decide the case on the merits alone.
The judge in the case spoke specifically about the settlement, saying he didn't see any evil intent or anything suspicious about the timing, though it is $27 million the same week the jury selection began. Do you agree with him? Do you also think nothing suspicious in the timing of that?
I would find it hard to believe that a municipality would reach a settlement with the intent of harming any particular defendant. And they have no skin in the game at this point. They've reached a settlement It has nothing to do with what's going to happen here. In fact, there are two different levels of liability. One is civil, which is preponderance of the evidence. The other one is beyond a reasonable doubt in the criminal context. So they really are very different. I don't think that this is something that would preclude the case from being heard. I don't think it subjects the case to a change in venue. And I don't think it's something that will prevent you from being able to find jurors that will be able to sit and be fair.
Lots of questions to the potential jurors asking if they've seen any reporting on the Floyd case or what happened or the civil settlement. How could any potential jurors in Minneapolis not have any idea what happened?
Well, what I would be looking for there is honesty. If someone told me that they had no idea, then I'd be a bit suspect of that person. And it wouldn't bother me so much whether they've heard anything. What would be my primary concern is, have you formed opinions? What opinions, if any, did you form as a result of the very limited coverage that you've seen? And quite often you'll hear 40, 50 seconds about the case. You might hear that 100 times, but it's the same 40 or 50 seconds. It's not substantive evidence. It's not sworn testimony. So ideally, if the judge does a good job of asking these questions and exploring it thoroughly enough and allows the lawyers on both sides to also have the time necessary to ask the proper questions, you'll end up with a proper jury that'll be able to be fair and impartial.
Mayo, we've seen constant reporting on the demographic breakdowns of jurors. How many men, how many women, how many black jurors, how many white. If you're the attorney for Chauvin, do you want as white a jury as possible? And given how much attention this case has gotten, will the demographic breakdown of the jury be critical to the verdict?
In this case, I can't imagine that it should be. I think that you have a tremendous amount of evidence, and that evidence will be explored by whoever's on the jury. And I don't think you need to be a particular color to draw a conclusion based upon what happened here. I do think that what we'll find is sometimes people expect that because let's say one party is black, that you're better off having a black juror. That's not always the case. In fact, I remember having a jury pool where everybody was black except for one person. And that was the person I wanted on my jury most of all. I was defense on this case. But this person belonged to all of the organizations that I look to when I want to find somebody who I think can really be fair. It's a person who's a leader, who I didn't think would be swayed by other people. And it's a person that's committed based upon their strong internal ethics. So I thought that they would not rush through the case. They'd take the time necessary and they'd stick to their guns. I think that they would also listen to other people. So sometimes you want someone who doesn't necessarily fit what you're looking for under normal circumstances. And in this case, the roles are generally reversed. Normally, you're looking for the prosecution wants people that they think are blue-collar workers. They like to have people that work for the telephone company, for Con Ed, for your municipality, that they believe will be more in favor of law enforcement. In this case, they may seek people that they normally wouldn't seek because the people in charge that are being charged are actually members of law enforcement.
I want to switch to a couple of other topics, Mayo. First, the Georgia massage murders last night. They were all in Asian massage parlors. Most of the victims were Asian. And we're in the middle of a period of increased hate crimes against Asians and Asian Americans. So it would be easy to jump to the conclusion that this was a bias crime. But police are already saying it's not racially motivated, not being considered a bias crime. As someone who's investigated and prosecuted bias crimes in the past, how common is that for an incident to have a lot of the ingredients that would make up a bias crime, but it's not one? And how do you decide if something is a bias crime?
It's much more common than people would think. However, what doesn't happen quite enough is that we get a thorough enough investigation to determine if it's a bias crime. And you hit a really great point, Andrew. You need to really turn every stone in order to determine what the motivation was. It's not what you look like or what your background is. It's why the person targeted you. Were you targeted based upon your race, your gender, your ethnicity? So when you look at these cases, all of the people who died were Asian women. According to the statement by this young man, from what I can see, he had issues that dealt with sexuality. Now, that doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive. It could be that it's a hate crime for multiple reasons. It could be that it's a hate crime because he targeted women. It could be a hate crime because he targeted Asians and Asian women. But it could also be something where it's not a hate crime, where he has a relationship to these different parlors. Unfortunately, irrespective of whether it ends up being labeled a hate crime, it carries all of the same attributes of a hate crime because it would be an extremely unique circumstance where you have so many people with so much in common, and there's not that common link of hatred here as a motivator, at least in whole or in substantial part. And even if it turns out that it wasn't, it still has the same chilling effect in the Asian community because Asians that are going to work now do so with fear. If you're an Asian young lady, if you work in a massage parlor or something like that, you now are going to be with a heightened level of fear. And that's exactly the issue when we're dealing with hate crimes, because hate crimes select not only the individual, and it goes beyond the individual's willingness to address it or their interest in seeing someone prosecuted, because it now impacts anyone that's in your community, whether they are actually Asian or someone perceives them to be, and it impacts the entire society.
So then, Mayo, what's the best way to attack surges in hate and bias crimes, like the increase in attacks against Asians and Asian Americans? We can't possibly prosecute our way to a bias-free America.
No, and you hit it right on the head. Andrew, you have to do it through building relationships and also through treating people the way you'd like to be treated. And if you look at something and you see someone who's been targeted, if you're willing to be, as we say now, an upstander or an active bystander, to intervene to the best of your ability in a manner in which you feel safe doing so. And sometimes that means something as simple as dialing 911. Then you're doing your job, and then standing with the victim as a community. And if we start to rebuild community, which has been falling apart for decades now throughout the country, then we are in a much better position. Anytime you have someone who's targeted, especially through no actions of their own, an irrational targeting of an individual and or community, it's incumbent upon other members of the community to be good neighbors, to stand with those people, stand with that community, and let them know that they're not by themselves.
Mayo Bartlett is an attorney at Mayo Bartlett PLLC. He's also the former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. Mayo, my friend, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. Good to see you. Be well.
And up next, we go back to Capitol Hill and get the latest on the filibuster, the Capitol riot, and more with ABC News political director Rick Klein.